Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, babies in their diapers, welcome to the Tiberius Show with your host, Tiberius Boy.
That's me, Tiberius.
And welcome to the Tiberius Show today. And I'm your host, Tiberius Boy. And as always, we're looking at various jobs and how they affect the world around us. Today's is going to be very interesting. We're going to talk to the guy who knows a guy. Do you have any idea what someone who like that does? Well, I know I don't. So, hey, let's talk to this guy and find out. Let me introduce our next guest. The one, the only, the amazing Michael Whitehouse.
Hello. Thank you for having me on. Great to be here.
Thank you for being on the show. Okay, so you were listed as the guy who knows a guy. Can you explain to my listeners exactly what you do?
As soon as I figure it out, I'll let you know. No, so as the guy who knows a guy, I am a connector. I make introductions for people. It's evolved over time because actually the business started as a 2020 pivot. I wrote this book called The Guy Who Knows a Guy back in 2017, sharing my knowledge about networking that I was using in the local community. And then when things went online, I took those skills to the global world and started making connections and meeting people and discovered online coaching. And that's evolved into being a connector, running virtual summits. I run about 6-7 virtual summits a quarter. I run a networking event called JV Connect and a few other things, working with a Great Discovery and working with some other partner companies. So I do a lot of things, mostly involving connecting people and helping people find solutions and pursuing whatever the universe brings to me.
Okay, so what sparked your interest in learning to just know people?
Not being good at anything else. So I moved to Groton, Connecticut back in 2014, and I didn't know anyone. And it was suggested that I should go to a networking event. And there happened to be one the night before I was moving into town. So I went there. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a business. I didn't have anything to sell. But I had being extroverted. And I started meeting people. And as I met people, I knew more people. So that's what I had to offer. So I'd meet people and I'd say, who are you looking to meet? And they'd say, oh, I need to meet more realtors. And I'd say, oh, there's a realtor over there. Have you met him? No. Okay. Let me introduce you. And I just kept doing that, providing value, making connections. And within months, I was connecting with mayors, CEOs, all kinds of significant people around town. And within a year, nobody believed me that I'd only been there for a year. I was like, I moved here last year. Like, no, you didn't. You know way too many people. But I just leveraged that. And then as I got further into business, I found ways to find business opportunities from it. But the big pivot point was 2020, because that's when I'm in Southeast Connecticut. Southeast Connecticut's a small place, 250,000 people in the whole county. So once I went online, the world accessible by Zoom and the internet is a big place, a really big place, 2.5 billion English speakers in the world. So I was able to, since then I've been interviewed on over 200 podcasts. I've written a second book. I've run 45 summits. I've interviewed 200 and something people on my own show. And I've just gotten out and found all kinds of really cool stuff without leaving my basement.
So how long does it usually take to meet a new person that you can refer to someone else to?
So I can refer someone pretty rapidly. It's a question of finding out who they're looking to meet and what they're looking for. And a lot of the connections I make aren't so much endorsed connections as simply, hey, I met this person and you might like to meet them too. It's because, there's some people who are more about, okay, I only introduce people if they're vetted and I've done a background check and I know 37 of their friends, I met their family and I've done a tarot reading on them. For me, I'll meet someone, introduce them minutes later. And it's on the basis of, hey, I just met this guy named Tiberius. He's really into radio shows. I know you also have a radio show. I thought you guys might want to talk about it. I'm not saying you should hire them. I'm not saying you should work with them. I'm not saying you should even trust them. I'm just saying I met this person. It might be a good connection for you. Let me put that together. And by doing that sort of soft introduction, as opposed to a real endorsement, I'm able to make more connections, create more value. Because a lot of people, they don't know how to get out there. They don't know how to
I
meet
see.
people.
Yeah.
So simply saying, I met someone you might want to meet, that's valuable because they're not already out there, making those kinds of connections. For some people, not for others. For others, for some people, they meet so many people, they don't need another,
Yeah.
I met someone, maybe you want to meet them. But a lot of people are in a place where it's really valuable and powerful for them to just get connections to the right kind of people they might want to know.
All right. So, what's the best part about knowing other people?
There's a lot of great parts, but one of the best is having the resources I need when I need them. So if I need someone to design a website for me or I need to hire someone, I know who to hire. I'm not going on Google and hoping for the best. If I need an answer to a question that I can't just get by searching, I can generally get those answers by asking people in my network.
Yeah.
And it's one of those situations where sometimes I think, wow, it must be awful not to be a connector. How do you do anything? And then what's been interesting is I've shifted my network from local to global. And of course, I bought my house in 2020. So before, when I didn't own a house, I knew everyone to do everything I needed for the house. Then I bought the house, shifted online. Now that network has faded because it's like a muscle. If you don't work it, then you don't maintain those connections. Now I have a house that needs stuff. I don't know who to call because that part of the network has faded, and I now know people all over the world and not just here locally.
Yeah.
But when we bought the house, I knew the realtor, I knew the mortgage guy, I knew the home inspector. So a lot of the stress went out of it because I had relationships with the people that I was working with, and it wasn't quite so mysterious and scary. I knew who I was working with and who I was dealing with, and I knew I could trust them because I had that relationship, and that was extremely valuable.
Okay. Now, here seems like a good time to take a quick commercial break. Let's hear a word from our sponsors. And we are back here talking with Michael Whitehouse, and Michael is the guy who knows a guy. Okay, now, are there any challenges in knowing people? Like, how do you keep them all in your head and remember them?
I don't. So there's two styles of networking that I've found. There's the introverted style and the extroverted style. So to define the terms, an introvert is someone who it drains their social batteries to engage with people socially. An extrovert draws energy from engaging with socially. So an extrovert, I mean, everyone has their limits, but
Yeah.
I only found my limits when I was operating a game store that was open 10 hours a day, and I had to be in front of people 10 hours a day. And after a few weeks of that, I started to wear out because I'm that much of an extrovert. There's some people, after an hour of social engagement, they're getting worn out. So the extrovert wants to just meet more people. More people, more people, more people. The introvert wants to meet as few people as possible because it takes energy to do so. And what the result of that is, as an extrovert, if I have an option, I could either write down notes or send out thank you cards or whatever, or I could go to another event and meet more people. I'm going to go meet more people. I don't have time to write notes. I got another event to go to. Whereas the introvert, if they have the choice between writing notes and doing follow-up activities and whatnot, or going out and meet more people, well, they got a whole lot of notes to write, and I got to get that thank you note out, and I got to make sure people feel appreciated. So introverts are often the better networkers because they keep track of the people they meet. They build deeper relationships with that group of people that they're getting to know, whereas extroverts are more often the ones who are just kind of like, hey, how you doing? Okay, who's next? Who's next? They're the ones you see, glad handing around the event. So as an extrovert, and that being my style, what I've learned is I provide value up front as much as possible. So I try to share some advice or an introduction or points in the right direction or give them value so they remember me and have a good experience with it, because I don't necessarily have systems to keep track of every single person I meet. Often the introduction I'm making is to someone who's top of mind. I met with them earlier in the week or 2 weeks ago, and I remember them. And as I'm talking to the next person, I'm like, oh, yeah, you should meet Bob. I met him the other day. Let me send you an email, connect you with them. But
Okay.
I might not necessarily remember someone who is, who was right up the street from me or is, a few weeks back, because they didn't, it's not they didn't make an impression. It's just when you meet 20 people a week, a couple of them will stick and the rest will often, go off the back. Now, when you meet a kid who has their own TV and radio show, and then 3 months later you hear from them again, you might remember that guy. But a lot of people I meet, it's like, oh yeah, a mindset coach. Yes, I'm sure you're a great mindset coach, just like the other 3 mindset coaches I met today. So nothing against them, but they don't stand out and stick in my mind, so I might not refer them as much. I have long thought it would benefit me to have more technology. I do now have a better CRM system, which is a customer response management is what it stands for, but I use it as a networking management tool. I found one called Less Annoying CRM, because it's a less annoying CRM. It's finally one that I can actually use after looking for 3 years. But I still have not mastered the technology of keeping track of all those relationships, setting up a database, all that kind of stuff. But I provide value up front when I first meet people, and thus when I run into them again, they appreciate that, and they might want to reciprocate or have that gratitude. So that's really the strategy that I use. So anyone's like, I'm not that organized, I can't remember all those names. Cool, me neither. And yet I'm the guy who knows a guy because I wrote the book on the subject. So that's the main thing, is providing that value up front.
Okay. So you're known as the guy who knows a guy. Do you know any girls?
So actually about 70% of my network is women. So it's the reason it's the guy who knows a guy is, and I actually explained this in the introduction to the book. So obviously you didn't read my book. Not that I'm surprised. I don't expect you to read the book. But in the introduction to the book, I explained that it's not a gender thing. It's a rhetorical thing. That when we're trying to come up with names, the man who knows a man or woman to network with doesn't have the same ring to it as the guy who knows a guy. And there's no gender neutral way to, or there's no other wording to do that. But I actually find that similar to how introverts tend to be better networkers by default, technically, women tend to be better networkers than men, because women tend to be more relationship oriented and men tend to be more transactional. Transactional and networking do not go well together. So a lot of these networking events that people go to, that's just people shoving business cards in your hand, being like, "Hey, so if you ever need a pool repair guy, then call me." That's that kind of dude networking, as opposed to the more feminine style of networking is more about how can I help you? What can I do for you? What are you looking for? Who are you? What kind of person? What do you find interesting? What's fun for you? So my network is definitely more women, and it's more of a feminine style of networking.
Oh, okay. So who is the coolest person you've met so far?
I have met a lot of cool people, so I'm not sure I can really zero it into the coolest. So I haven't met a lot of famous people. But see, I think the one I was most excited to meet when he said yes to my podcast was Bob Berg. So Bob Berg wrote a book called The Go-Giver, which is a play on the phrase the go-getter. And he's teaching basically a style of networking similar to what I'm talking about, which is all about approaching to give. That
I see.
It's saying the amount of money you make is based on the value you provide, not what you can take.
Okay.
And so when I invited him to my podcast, I'd actually been trying to meet him for a while, and he has, because a lot of people want to meet him on the podcast. I just talked about this amazing technique for saying no nicely, and he said no to me twice, so it was very nice. I got no in a LinkedIn message, I got no in an email. But it's because it wasn't giving me a clear reason to meet. And finally I said, why don't you come on the podcast? I can interview you and share your story. And he's like, I would love to do that. That would be wonderful. Okay. So finally I had to meet Bob Berg. I think that might be the coolest person I've met so far. But there's a whole lot of other really cool people. I mean, I've met something like 4,000 people over the last 4 years. So there have been a lot of really cool people in that community.
Okay. Now, in your bio, it says you have a podcast. Can you tell me what you talk about more?
Sure. So I have the Guy Who Knows a Guy podcast, which is more of an archived podcast at this point, because the summits that I run are more taking the role the podcast had in my business in terms of building community. But on the podcast, I use that to interview successful people in business and find out what they were doing. So, the kind of people who I might have to pay them for their advice normally, I brought them on the podcast, said, can you tell me your story? How'd you do it? What's your secret? And they're happy to share because it gives a chance to to show off. I'm actually now launching a new podcast, which is going to be primarily solo, a few interviews, called the Faith, Hope, and Love podcast, going into different issues in the Bible and dispelling some myths and kind of diving in. And what's making that possible is an artificial intelligence assistant. So instead of having to do 5 hours of research, I'm now able to go to AI and say, what are all the verses in the Bible on this topic? And boom, 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 boom. It'll share them.
Wow.
If there's a controversy, I'll say, what's the controversy on this question? What are the verses that side A uses? What are the verses side B uses? Explain it all to me. 3 minutes. Bang, 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 bang. All the research is done. And then I can deeper dive into anything. It can translate. I can say, what are the original Greek or Hebrew words used in this verse? Dang. So it's something I've wanted to do for years, but never had the time because, I got a business to run. I got a job to do. And now I have a robot that'll do all the work for me. And now I can really dive into these topics. It's really been an amazing experience going into that research.
Okay. Now, is there a problem that you wouldn't know a person to refer to so that they can solve it?
Any problem that can be solved by people can be solved by networking because everyone in the world is connected. So I'm sure you've heard the concept of 6 degrees of separation. And among connectors, it tends to be fewer. To any random person, a farmer up in the Yukon to a shepherd down in Namibia, it's still probably 6 degrees. Yeah. But to people who have solutions, to people who are coaches and experts and whatnot, it's usually 3 or 4 degrees, if not less. So whatever the problem is, that I almost definitely know someone who knows someone who has a solution to it. And I rarely encounter truly novel problems. Most problems that people bring to me are familiar. And that's actually why I ended up building a program called the Foundations Inner Circle, because there's so many people out there in business trying to figure it out. And the thing about business is you don't have 3 big problems you need to solve. You have 100 little problems. And some of them could be solved by a 4-minute answer if you can find someone who has the 4-minute answer. Yeah. Well, me with my ADHD running around being an extrovert, I've picked up a lot of 4-minute answers to a lot of questions. And it's gotten to the point where people ask me all kinds of random stuff like, oh, yeah, if you want to do that, you want to do this, and here's some of the software that does that. Oh, you want that? Yeah, this guy does this. I almost always have the little answer. I know the big answers. I don't have the deep dive 10-part course answer. But in terms of the starting point, I want to launch an email list. How do I do that? I got that. What are the typical joint venture, parameters? I've got that. What does a program look like? Most of the things I've got at least the outline of, and then I can say for more information, you can deep dive into here. Yeah. And there's so many people whose businesses stall because they can't get simple answers. Google doesn't have this stuff. There's books, but it tends to be on page 237 in a footnote. So, because it's all the simple stuff that is so obvious you wouldn't think to tell anyone to write it down. But if you don't know it, it's going to stop you in your tracks. And so having gleaned all, hearing the same things over and over again, I've started building it around coaching calls. My program actually meets on Wednesday, the same day we're recording this. And so people bring me questions and they end up being similar questions because fundamentally in any, that's why there's FAQs, frequently asked questions, because there's so many common questions and most people are doing similar things. So they have similar questions. If you're trying to get healthier, it's, how do I lose weight? How do I cook healthier without having enough time? How can I exercise without a lot of equipment? How do I avoid hurting myself? Basic questions that everyone's going to have the same questions. In business, it's a lot of the same things. How do I figure out what I actually came up with 9 foundational questions because the same things came up so often. So you need to start with these 9 before you dive into what do I call my lead magnet or how do I write my second book? Maybe start with the basic questions. Yeah. What are your values? What problem do you solve? How do you sell it? That kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, what's the most misunderstood part about your business?
The most misunderstood part about my business, I think it'd be what networking is. I will often talk to people who say, oh, I don't like networking. And I say, well, tell me more. What don't you like? And they say, well, I don't like having to pitch myself all the time. I don't like people shoving business cards in my hand. I don't like having to talk to a lot of people in loud, crowded rooms. And I said, cool. None of the things you described are networking. So what don't you like about networking? There's all these things that are associated with networking, but they're not networking.
Yeah.
They're just they're ways you might network. So I like networking at a live event with some wine and cheese and business cards. And yeah, some people are going to shove business cards in my hand. Okay, cool. That's not who I want to meet. I'm going to go meet someone else. But if you don't know how to work that room, then yeah, it's loud, it's crowded, it's obnoxious. And if you think your job is to pitch yourself in 60 seconds, you're going to have a bad experience.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't understand what networking is, let alone how to do it. How to do it's the next step after. They don't even know what it is. If they knew what it was, they could figure out how to do it. But they think it's going to a room pitching themselves, and the result is you get these rooms full of people pitching themselves. I imagine you probably, I am guessing at some point you've had the experience, you met some professional, maybe a contractor of some kind, who shoved a business card into your hand and said, so if you ever need what I do, which you obviously don't because you're not old enough, and then maybe caught themselves, or if your dad does, give him my card. Have you ever had someone try to pitch you on something completely ridiculous? Yeah. So that's the problem. People don't get what networking is, and that's the epitome of not understanding how to network. You know, when you're pitching a child, or you're pitching a underage boy on, you know, roof repair services or life insurance or anything like that, then you might be off the mark in the networking strategy.
Yeah. So, what's the hardest part about working as the guy who knows a guy?
The hardest part is figuring out what is the actual business. So I know what I do. I help people by making connections. I provide a lot of value by making introductions. But then it's, what do I do that I get paid for? And that's been the exploration over the last 4 years. So for a while, I tried doing an introduction service. People would pay me to make introductions for them. The challenge was I'd make the introductions, and then they wouldn't make deals out of those introductions. And they'd say, it's not working. I'm like, well, it's working. I'm giving you what you paid for. They're like, yeah, but I'm not making money from it. I'm like, yeah, that's because you're not doing what you're supposed to do with it. So I've experimented a few things. And what I'm finding is working is multiple streams of income. So I have a done for you summit service where people can hire me to run a summit. I do introduction. I do a lot of affiliate marketing. I promote other people's trusted people's programs for commission. I'm in the Great Discovery, which is a course creation platform where I get paid for promoting other people's courses and inviting people into the platform. I do some other, what are my other streams of income? You know, I have all these different places. I run, of course, the Foundation's Inner Circle program. So I have all these different things going. And instead of trying to say, what's the one thing that'll make me a whole bunch of money, I say, what are the various streams I can create that can do that? But that's the biggest challenge, is it's not like I'm good at painting houses, so I sell house painting services. So who needs house painting services? Let me do that. That's the difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur. A business owner is someone who does a thing, and they need to have a business to do it, because there's no money in house painting unless you are the owner of the company.
Yes.
So that's someone who is they own a business as a means to an end. An entrepreneur is someone who doesn't want to have a job, and they're looking to do their own thing. And entrepreneurs tend to fall into the trap of, oh yeah, I run events, but I also do coaching, but I also code websites, but I also do some graphic design, but I also, because we like chasing after all kinds of things. And done well, that's multiple streams of income. Done poorly, it's chasing squirrels around the yard. But it's the same basic concept, and that's what entrepreneurs are all about, is finding opportunities and pursuing them, and sometimes more than one at a time.
So what message do you want to tell children all over the world about doing the work that you do?
So to kids, to children, by which I mean anyone under the age of 35, the message is it's not the 50s and 60s anymore. A lot of the advice that's being given about school and, go to school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, graduate, you'll get a good job, do whatever it takes to make that happen, is terrible advice. Because whatever it takes to make that happen means debt. And the debt load that a lot of kids are coming out of college with is not justified by the income they make from the jobs they're making, because of an economic shift where labor jobs are now paying better than white collar jobs overall. The highest paid jobs are white collar jobs, but the average white-collar job makes less than the average blue-collar job. Beyond that, with the shifts in technology, and this was long before AI came along, but AI is going to accelerate it. With the shifts in technology, the job you're thinking about now may not exist in 10 years, which means if you're 13, by the time you graduate school, that job may not exist anymore. So the most important thing is to develop the flexible skills, networking, speaking, sales, personal development, goal setting, mindset, controlling your mindset, getting in touch even with things spiritually, whatever your religious practice happens to be, grounding yourself to your core values. All those things are more valuable than learning about engineering or programming computers or graphics. You should develop all those skills too. Absolutely. But that path of you're going to get good grades, go to school, get a good job through the Career Center, and then work for 35 years and retire with a gold watch, that's a myth. You'd be better off to say, I'm going to become a knight and slay dragons, because you're more likely to find a job doing that somehow than you are to follow the career path that existed now almost pushing 100 years ago. In the 80s, this stuff disappeared. That lifestyle disappeared. Some people still had it, but going to the 2020s, it's an entirely different world. And entrepreneurship, the biggest appeal is there are no longer safe jobs. Every job out there is inherently unstable with the economic shifts. So entrepreneurs with I don't know what I'm making from week to week, I'm more stable over the long term than most people with steady jobs. And in 2020, we saw that. And I looked at a lot of my friends and said, how's your steady job doing over there? Because they got laid off and suddenly everything was thrown in turmoil. For me, it was just another shift. I'm like, oh, are we pivoting again? Cool. What's up? People with jobs have been working for 10 years in the same place. They got laid off, or they were working from home, or they were completely knocked on their butts. Whereas every entrepreneur out there just said, interesting, new environment. Okay, what are the rules of the game now? We're all on Zoom. Everything's virtual. Okay, cool. Let's do it. Let's go.
Okay.
So, always stay nimble.
Well, on that note, let's take a quick break to pay some bills.
The Tiberius Show would like to thank one of their dedicated sponsors, Custom Designs Orlando. These guys are on Mills Avenue and do all sorts of stuff, ranging from photo ID badges, engraved signs, custom Braille ADA signs, vinyl lettering to trophies and awards. The cool part about Custom Designs is they can ship products all over the United States. You can reach them at 407-898-0373 and tell them that
Tiberius
sent you.
And we are back with Michael Whitehouse, the guy who knows a guy. Okay, so at what age level do you think people should learn to do this type of work? Like, is it safe for kids to learn about and try to get into?
Well, it's important to know how to speak, so you shouldn't do it before the age of like 3 or 4. But really, if you can hold a conversation and access the internet, then you're old enough to start considering networking. Now, for some kids, they're gonna be like, I'd rather not. But my daughter is 9, and I've started bringing her to Toastmasters to get her comfortable speaking in front of people. Whenever we're out. So one of these things I've done that's a little different than some parents is that there's a concept of stranger danger. Don't talk to strangers. And here's the thing. You raise a kid and you say, don't talk to strangers. Don't talk. Strangers are dangerous. Don't talk to strangers. Look out for strangers. Look out for strangers. And then all of a sudden they're 22. And now go talk to some strangers. See if they'll give you a job. Never talked to a stranger in my life. They're terrifying.
Yeah.
You spent 2 decades telling me they're terrifying. And now everything I do depends on them.
Yep.
I look at my life. Every good thing that's happened has happened because of someone who was first a stranger other than my family. And every bad thing that someone's done to me, with 1 or 2 exceptions, has been someone I knew. Rarely do strangers do bad things. They don't care enough, right? Except for maybe like a mugger or someone sideswipes your car or something. But for the most part, very few people care enough to hurt you if they're a stranger. The really bad people you're going to encounter in life, they know you. They have some reason to take something from you because they know you. So I am not teaching my daughter fear of strangers. Also, fear of strangers is natural. So I am teaching her to talk to people. If she wants something, we're in a restaurant. And she said, I really like that lady's dress. And I said, good, go tell her. And she's like, what? I'm like, get up and tell her you like her dress. Why not? But I push her to do that because that ability, if you talk to a lot of people successful in business, they have the ability to start a conversation in a grocery store or a hair salon or anyone. They're like, oh my, he's amazing. He can talk to anyone. He can, and thus can sell anything. Because in that conversation, the opportunities will present and networking. So I would say it at any, because most people, one of my streams of income is driving Uber. I have done over 4,000 rides, and I have met people all times of day or night in the worst cities in Connecticut, and I have yet to meet someone who is not a decent person. Most people are decent people. Now, that doesn't mean you can trust them with your life. That doesn't mean that you can trust them to hold your money for you or to keep an eye on your wallet. But most people aren't criminals. Most people, 99% of people aren't dangerous. Back them into a corner, they'll become dangerous. But most people aren't dangerous. Yeah. And you're more likely to be accidentally hit by a car than to have someone intentionally do you harm. And so for kids, and despite, it's like, oh, these days things are more dangerous. No, they're not. The news covers it more. Any dangerous thing that happens anywhere in the country you hear about. Yeah. But crime statistics are lower than they've ever been. The world is safer than it's ever been. What's dangerous now is the economy's shifting under our feet. And the only thing that protects you from that is a network and those soft skills. That's the only thing that's going to help you when AI takes what you thought was going to be your job, or when the company you thought you're going to work for gets outsourced to Zimbabwe or something. Then the only thing that's going to help you is your network, your ability to connect with people, and your ability to build relationships. And that's what everything is built on. So I would say it's not a question of what's the minimum wage that it's safe to do this. It's what's the maximum age that is safe to start at. How late are you going to wait to give your kids the skills they need to survive and thrive in the future economy? And for kids, how long are you going to wait to develop the skills you need to survive and thrive in the future economy?
Okay. So if you could have the people that be able to get you to meet and talk to any historical figure, who would that person be, and what historical figure would they help you talk to, and why?
Ooh, historical figure. That is fascinating. So one of the challenges of when you study history is you get to learn that everyone's just a human, and find that even the people, because in the same way that social media shares greatest hits, history shares greatest hits. So if someone is a historical figure who's in favor, then we only share the good stuff, and if they're out of favor, then we only share the bad stuff. So I'm not sure who I would necessarily want to meet. Who I'd be both say about, but the one that comes to mind though, who has a fascinating story, is Voltaire, because Voltaire was a brilliant philosopher, scientist, and he lived off being supported by someone else's wife. So he basically was dating someone else's wife, and he lived in her big mansion, supported by her husband, and the husband lived somewhere else and was perfectly happy with it. And it's a fascinating story to me that. And the thing is, like, this is, was he 17th century France? We have this idea of the world is a certain way all the time. And then we peel back a little bit of history and discover, things aren't always the way we think they were all the time. In fact, they're very, very different. Yes. So, I think that's one. And then the other one comes to mind now that I'm studying it. I think it might be interesting to meet St. Paul from the Bible, who wrote the letters, because he was an interesting character because he basically founded all the churches around the Mediterranean without the benefit of charisma. He talks about the fact that he's not a smooth talker. He's just this guy who was really confident about what he was doing and really convicted about it. And then all these other preachers came through who were like slick and charismatic and cool, and some of the churches started wanting to follow them. And Paul's like, okay, cool. They're slick and charismatic, but what are they actually saying? You're listening to the words? So I think that he might be a fascinating and very intellectual person to talk to.
Well, what was the biggest mistake that you've ever made, and how did it change you as a person?
But there's so many. So I think the one I'm going to go with on this is moving to Connecticut. So I lived in Western Massachusetts. Now, by Florida standards, I barely moved across the street. But by New England standards, moving an hour is a big distance. So I moved from Western Massachusetts, where I lived for 13 years, to Western Connecticut because I was working an overwhelming insurance job. I thought I'd be better off if I moved closer. And I moved away from my community, away from the people I knew, away from the area I knew, and into a place where it was more humid and unpleasant. And I actually went to go back, and that's when I met my now wife, who kind of drew me further in Connecticut, so in one way, that was the biggest mistake, leaving Massachusetts. Should not have done it. But I would not change, if anyone was like, you can go back in the past and change anything in your past, I wouldn't change anything, because I don't know which of the things I think are mistakes are the crucial pivot points that lead to the things that are most valuable. If I hadn't moved to Connecticut, I wouldn't have met Amy. If I didn't meet Amy, wouldn't have had Rowan. That's my daughter. And so I might say I wish I was still, but it's not like, if I stayed in Massachusetts, I would have met a different Amy and had a different Rowan. That's not quite the same. People aren't necessarily interested. Maybe I would have met a better wife and with better genes and made a better kid, I guess. But I also might have met a worse wife with worse genes and made a worse kid. And I definitely would have been a different kid. So it did change me because, and actually now that I'm thinking about it more, it forced me out of the network I had, out of the community I had, and I had to start from scratch 3 separate times in Waterbury and Milford and Groton. And it was the third time when I became the guy who knows a guy, but I started building a network 2 other times before that, not counting when I was in Massachusetts. So while it was somewhat unpleasant and I gave up a place that I really liked and a community I really liked, it also served to lay the groundwork for everything else good that happened, for meeting Amy, for becoming the guy who knows the guy, for making the connections I made, for buying a house, for, all this stuff. None of it would have happened if I hadn't made that mistake.
Now, can you tell me that one story? Remember, this is a kid's show. But that one story, that you're not supposed to tell me about. Come on, you can tell me.
The one story I'm not supposed to tell you about, that's going to be an easy one. Okay, it's a kid's show. Let's make sure It's a kid's show in 2024. You're probably familiar with this. So I am a pretty comfortable speaker, and I'm a pretty comfortable speaker because I had a lot of time on stage when I was younger in my 20s, because I was the founder of a Rocky Horror Picture Show cast. Now, Rocky Horror Picture Show in 1975, when it came out, was extremely avant-garde and boundary pushing. In 2024, it is probably, I'm pretty sure they can run it on Fox in prime time now with only a couple of scenes cut. But one thing they do is it's called a shadow cast. And shadow cast is the actors will perform the show in costume in front of the screen. So the movie's up there playing, and then the actors are acting it out live in front of it. And if you're familiar with the movie, there are some characters who are in a scant state of dress. Rocky wears a gold Speedo. And so I played Rocky a few times. I played Brad, who spends much of the movie in his skivvies. And I did various other embarrassing and fun things as the MC often. And I did it for 3 years, which means I was up there for probably about 150 shows. And once you've done all those different things, and you've played Rocky, and you've done these goofy, not really embarrassing, but I guess if you're shy, they'd be embarrassing, goofy, silly things in pre-shows and whatnot. That certainly, if at the time, if I went back to myself when I was doing that and I said, this is going to be one of the foundational things of your life, they'll give you a crucial skill for business, I'd be like, I'm sorry, what? And even if I said that to myself and I believed it, I probably would have picked the wrong skills. I'm like, so it'll teach me about politics and managing group dynamics? No, you're terrible at that. You screw that one up terribly. It's going to teach you to get comfortable on stage and realize there's nothing to be afraid of. And now I get up on a stage in front of 50 people or 5,000 people or 50,000 people and just speak to them because it's no big deal. Now, if it's a high stakes speech, that's still nerve-wracking because the speech is high stakes. But if it's just, hey, Michael, get up here in front of these 50,000 people and tell us about yourself or share a bit about networking. All right, cool. I don't even ask how big the audiences are of shows that I'm going out to, but I'm sure some of them, I mean, this one probably has a decent sized audience. I'm sure I go on shows where I'm going to be in front of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. I don't think about it because I've been up on stage on camera so many times. No big deal. And it's purely, I think a lot of it's because of that exposure therapy that I've been through. I've been on stage 150 times, many of them in my underwear. You know the old joke, like picture the audience in their underwear to get comfortable. I got in front of the audience in my underwear. So, nothing's going to be scary on stage after that.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you think my listeners should know about you?
There's so much they shouldn't know about me. No, anything else they should know? Well, so the key thing is I got 2 books out there. So if you want to get to know more about me, if you want to learn about networking, I've got The Guy Who Knows a Guy over here. And my newest book is The View from the Deck. You can see this is the author's copy I've got here. The View from the Deck, Thoughts on Values, Vision, and Gratitude, where I talk about, surprise, surprise, values, vision, and gratitude, and learn how to appreciate what we have and then leverage what we have to get more of what we want. And most importantly, learn what we want first. And both those, of course, available on Amazon and anywhere else.
Well, do you have a Facebook or website for my listeners who want to follow you?
I do. So the website is guywhoknowsaguy.com. Not The Guy Who Knows a Guy. I couldn't get the, but guywhoknowsaguy.com. And if you want to learn more about my virtual events, it's summits.fun, because all summits should be .fun.
Well, what is that one question that you think I forgot to ask you?
I'm not sure there were any questions that I said, I wish you'd asked this question. So I think you pretty well covered it. And I'm really glad you asked the question about the question let me talk about like kids preparing for their futures. I think it was when should you start with this? Because that is crucial. So many people are still living in the 70s just without the big hair. And we need to be preparing the next generation for the next generation's economy. We need to be preparing the current generation for the current generation's economy, but they're already lost. So the next generation, we need to get them prepared so they don't fall into the same traps the millennials did.
Well, thank you, Michael, for being my special guest. Can you stick around for Math Corners?
Yes, I can. I got 5 more minutes.
Tiberius' favorite subject, it's Math Corners!
And now it's time for Math Corners. Thank you, Michael, for helping me with Math Corners. This week, we're going to do more multi-step word problems. My dad is always good at finding new problems for me to solve. Today, we're going to talk about people and problems and patterns. Imagine if a person had a problem and someone knew 5 people that had different rates of success. Well, let's list them off. Person A has an 80% chance of getting the problem solved. Person B has a 30% chance. Person C has a 75%. Person D has a 50%. And person E has a 95% chance. Now, based off this information, what order would you refer the people to the person to help them out the most?
Do I have to answer that?
No, I gotcha. Well, first, this is a real-world problem because, well, people have problems and might need more than one person to help them out. So, to solve this, first we need to figure out what the problem is asking. So, if we are referring 5 people to solve a person's problem, we should give them the biggest chance of working first and let it get lower and lower over time so that they have a higher chance of working. So, let's put them in order of highest chance to lowest chance. So, we see that person E has a 95% chance of solving the problem. Let's put them first. Now, looking at the rest of the people, we put person A next, then, because they have an 80% chance, then C with a 75, D 50, and last B with a 30% chance of solving the problem. So the answer is E, A, C, D, and B. So, Michael, did you ever have to figure out any crazy math questions like this when you were in school?
I did a bunch of crazy stuff in school. I was actually on the math team. I was a mathlete. But I do use math very often, pretty much every day, and a lot of algebra. And, not even advanced computer stuff, but just when you know algebra as a tool, it's actually really useful for things like budgeting, strategizing, team growth, knowing how to use Excel or Google Sheets is
Yeah.
what everyone uses now. That's all based on algebra. So
Cool.
people are like, I never use algebra. Yeah, well, I never use rocket science because I don't know rocket science. But if you know how to use it, you actually will use algebra all the time because it's a really dynamic tool.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for your help with Math Corners.
Over 40 years, Whitehouse, Central Florida has provided education, independent life skills, and job training to thousands of Central Floridians who live with blindness or any degree of vision loss. Whether it's picking out clothes in the morning or just moving around your community and serving Orange, Seminole, and Osceola counties. Contact Whitehouse, Central Florida at 407-898-2483 or visit them online at lighthousecfl.org.
And now it's time for the Heart of a Lion. As you know, we talk about the qualities of living by the Heart of a Lion, which stands for leadership, integrity, obedience, and ability. This week, we're going to talk about all 4 Lion Strong virtues. This week was the last week of school, and it was Dr. Ferentz' last year at my school. And well, he was the speaker of the last chapel of the school year and had a great message about Lion Strong and having those virtues in everyday life. Now, one of those examples was this. He said, the next person who gives me a fist bump gets $20. Now, everyone thought he was joking, but I knew deep down he was serious. And a few people did as well, and we all ran up there, and I gave him a fist bump, and he gave me $20. We had a conversation about Lion Strong and why I went up there. He used all the virtues of Lion Strong because he was being a leader by leading our school in the right direction, having integrity because he was doing what was right in God's eyes, and being obedient for what his gut said, and being noble for giving up $20 for a fist bump. So, Michael, did you see or use any of the Lion Strong virtues at all this week?
Those concepts are things that I use pretty much every day. Integrity is vital in business, and your integrity underlies everything. Remember I said your network is everything? Well, you have no network without integrity. So, those concepts are very powerful, and that idea of going up and doing it. That's one of the things you learn is don't wait for someone else to say, oh, yes, please get out of your chair and come up here. Most of the best things in life you get by getting up and grabbing them.
We should always try to be Lion Strong in everything we do, shouldn't we?
Absolutely.
And that's our show, folks. I want to thank the one, the only, the amazing Michael Whitehouse for being on my show. It has been so much fun talking to you today. I think I learned a lot about your career as the guy who knows a guy. Also, do you mind giving your website again?
www.guywhoknowsaguy.com.
Okay, and also you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at The Tiberius Show. And I would like to thank WWPR 1490 AM, KINT 98, Soul Radio 24/7, EasyWay TV, and all the other stations that air on my show. Please be sure to visit The Tiberius Show on YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Michael, are you subscribed yet?
Yes. Probably.
Okay. Oh, and be sure to leave me a comment if you want to work with different people. I answer all the comments myself. And also, be sure to listen to us next week on The Tiberius Show with your host, Tiberius Boy.